Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Friday, November the 17th, 2023, continuing our conversation, our discussion about this whole idea of gratitude. In his book, Jesus, Lord of Your Personality, Pastor Bob Russell points out that having a lot doesn't necessarily tend to produce a grateful spirit. He writes, "Have you ever had a taste of the best that this world has to offer? You went to Hawaii once on vacation, so now it's harder for you to enjoy the state park. You've eaten a steak at Ruth Chris." And maybe you recognize the name. I didn't. Apparently, it's the name of a very fancy steakhouse. You've eaten a steak at Ruth Chris, so it's harder to be thankful for a meal at Ponderosa. You remember those? The book is written a number of years ago. Ponderosas, I remember them. In 1989, there were apparently 700 of them across the country. By 2003, there were fewer than 400. It eventually merged with Bonanza, and together there's only 22 of them left. So big difference between the fancy Ruth Chris and a Ponderosa, which hardly even exists anymore. The idea between the best and just sort of average. He writes, "You've driven a Jaguar, so now you can't be as content with your used Chevrolet. You've cheered for a national champion, so now it's difficult to be grateful when your team has a good season but doesn't take home the title." Generally speaking, he says, the more we have, the less grateful we are. It should be the opposite, shouldn't it? The more we have, the more thankful we should be, but it usually doesn't work that way, does it? A wise man once prayed, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise I may have too much and disown you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God." Very wise sayings from the wisdom in the book of Proverbs, chapter 30, verses 8 through 9. Someone once said, "It's a rare person who, when his cup frequently runs over, can give thanks to God instead of just complaining about the limited size of his mug." And so sometimes we talk about an attitude of gratitude. God loves a cheerful giver. In fact, we're going to have that lesson, not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday in church. And there's a sense in which God will make us rich if we're generous in every occasion, but I don't think that God sees this richness in terms of money and material possessions, and yet generosity results in a thankful attitude and even a cheerful attitude because we are rich in what God has given us. Probably heard the saying, the principle of being grateful for all that we have, but also being grateful for those things that we don't have. You know, a lot of times we don't think about that. What kind of things could we be grateful for that we don't have, probably don't want, and maybe even glad we don't have? It's hard for me to open up the news feed on my iPhone and not get all the latest celebrity gossip and everything. And on the one hand, you go, "Oh wow, look at that! They're rich and they're famous." But then you hear about some of their troubles, and they have bigger troubles than I can even ever imagine handling. So there's a lot of things that I'm grateful that I don't have. Probably all of us, if we stop to think about it. And it's a matter of putting everything into perspective. A bishop of the early church was a remarkable example of the virtue of contentment. He was once asked his secret, and this venerable old man replied, "Well, it consists in nothing more than making a right use of my eyes, correct use of my eyes. In whatever state I am, I first of all look up to heaven and remember that my principal business down here is to get up there. And then I look down upon the earth and I call to mind how small a place I shall occupy in it when I die and am buried. And then I look around at the world and observe what multitudes there are who are in many respects more unhappy than myself. And thus I learn where true happiness is placed, where all our cares must end, and what little reason I have to complain." By putting things into perspective that way, there's much to be thankful for, much to be grateful for. And it's important for us to do that. We're reminded this time of year, maybe a little bit more than other times of year to do that, but it's something we should be doing really daily. With all the challenges and difficulties, there's always a lot that we can be so thankful for. And sometimes it's simply being thankful that things aren't worse than they are. But there's always, I'm reminded of the famous story, I think I've told it before, about giving thanks in all circumstances. And Corrie ten Boom, who was ended up in a concentration camp with her father and sister, who both died, unfortunately. And one time, her and her sister got placed in this barracks, and it was filled with fleas. And she was just so frustrated by that. But then her sister pointed out to something, because they were able to pray and have their worship services completely uninterrupted by the enemy soldiers, by the Nazi soldiers. And her sister pointed out to her that, the reason why they don't bother us here when we have our prayer meetings and Bible readings and worship services is because the guards don't want to come in here with all the fleas. So you wouldn't think of being thankful for fleas, but in that instance, in that set of circumstances, it was something to be thankful for. So what are those flea-like moments in our lives where you wouldn't think so at first glance, but upon further observation, we actually can be thankful? Maybe think about that today, and I'll be back together with you for the last time this week tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.